Now, President Jacob Zuma announced a dramatic reshuffle last night, axing 5 ministers. The rand is weakened around 5% against a basket of major currencies in Asian trade. That's compared with yesterday's JSE closing price of 12 rand 83 against the dollar. Now, for economic reaction to this, we are joined in studio by Prof Raymond Parsons of the Northwest University School of Business and Governance. Professor, a different slot from where we normally are, but this is very important. Cabinet reshuffle last night. Your thoughts on it? Could it be described as shrewd and calculated, or perhaps risque?
Well, Elvis, a former British Prime Minister once spoke about a week being a long time in politics. We haven't known a week like that for a while, but we've certainly gone through a week like that now. Now, whether it's a cabinet reshuffle or an election, they have consequences. They have economic consequences, particularly for South Africa at the moment. So I believe that the markets and indeed our business community will not only be looking at what has happened at the National Treasury, what are the changes there, which we'll come to, but also if we look at the cabinet as a whole, is it a better or a worse cabinet than before in terms of the challenges that we face? And we see recently there was a Stats South Africa survey saying that although there have been some improvements at the delivery level, in fact, they've said that 75% of South African households are dissatisfied with their delivery of services. So that's the challenge. And I think we must say, well, here's a new team, or at least a reshuffled team of the cabinet. That's the challenge they face. Can they turn that around as well? Then I think you look more specifically at the National Treasury, where there was a bit of a surprise, because I don't think that Minister Gigaba was on the short list of all the speculation in advance of that change. And perhaps because he has no business or financial background, so he was not on the short list. So there's a steep learning curve for him once he is sworn in this afternoon.
Now, Malusi Gigaba, Home Affairs and now Finance Minister. What does he bring to the table, you think, Professor?
Well, he brings a new face and a new approach. He's got big shoes to fill. It's important to understand that the National Treasury is an absolutely crucial ministry in our affairs. And the challenges that he faces are, firstly, we're still not out of the woods with our economy. We have a low growth rate and we're still worried about inflation. There are some green shoots in the economy which he must help to nurture. Secondly, we have the fact of the financial markets who've reacted very badly so far. We've seen it in the rand, and we'll see whether the rand will recover or not as they assess the implications. But he needs to win the confidence of the financial markets. Thirdly, there's been a team effort, which was in fact generated by the previous Minister Gordon with business and labour, talking to our foreign investors and other investors to give them a positive message about South Africa. I think there's an important challenge for the new minister to sustain and expand that, because there are some negative noises now coming from that quarter. And finally, there's the credit rating agencies, who will be talking to us again in June. We have experienced a negative outlook on the part of all of them. We're on the brink of, in fact, junk status with some of them. And so they too will want to be convinced and persuaded by the new minister that we are doing the right thing, and that we will, by managing our economy successfully, be able to fend off junk status in the way that Minister Gordon has been able to do.
Let's just take a look at the markets. The rand has weakened around 5% against a basket of major currencies in the Asian trade, compared with yesterday's closing price of 12 rand 83 against the dollar. Can we expect a similar reaction to that of Nene Gate in 2016?
Well, so far, although it's been quite a big knock in the financial markets, it's not been quite as drastic as it was when we had the Nene Gate experience. Why? Well, because there's been so much debate that there was going to be a cabinet reshuffle, that the sword of Damocles was hanging over both Minister Gordon and indeed the Deputy Minister Jonas, that to some extent this reaction has been priced in, but not entirely. And the fact remains that the rand as a major price in our economy has taken quite a knock because of the political risks that are seen around this particular cabinet reshuffle.
Talking about political risk, we are looking now at international investors. That was the finance minister's job, to woo those investors back into the country. There was a sort of a wait-and-see approach to this. What does this say about political certainty right now in the country?
Well, it's quite clear that until the dust settles around this cabinet reshuffle, there's an enormous amount of increased uncertainty. But not only among foreign investors, I think also among domestic investors will want to know two things. Are we going to have a national treasury which is still fiscally conservative? Is it anti-patronage? Because there is this big and very important criticism that certain elites are being favored by our policies. So I think that's the kind of perception that needs to be changed and to be put on the table by the new incumbents to say, we are going to win the confidence of markets and of business and of the country because we will do the right thing. And it's important, I think, for our economic outlook and the fact that this uncertainty is being somewhat corrosive of our economic outlook, that we turn the situation around sooner rather than later, because people's livelihoods, people's jobs are at stake on how we deal with this.
Now, you touched on the ratings agencies a little bit earlier. Now, they were waiting for an opportunity to downgrade the country. Is this perhaps that opportunity? And should we perhaps be wary, afraid, or very afraid? And will we survive, Professor?
Well, let me answer that in two parts. The first is, as I said earlier, we will see the credit rating agencies in a few months' time. We will have to put our case to them that we are, in fact, on top of the situation, that we are pressing the right buttons, that we have got financial stability, that we will reduce uncertainty in policy instead of there being a perception now that it's been increased by what's happened. And then finally, even on a worst-case scenario, Elvis, of course we'll survive, if survival is good enough. But I think most of the viewers will say that simply isn't good enough. We've got to show the leadership that we need in order to move this economy and this country ahead. And above all, I think in the light of these shocks and these political uncertainties that have now been generated, we need to rebuild the team effort among all of us to get this country moving again and to make this economy as strong as it can be and as it should be, so that more people will be better off in the future.
Professor, thank you so much for your time and joining us here on the Newsroom. That was Professor Raymond Parsons of the Northwest University School of Business and Governance, giving us his take on the cabinet reshuffle.